Right now, somewhere on this planet, a child is looking up at the night sky, finding that one faint reddish dot among the stars, and dreaming about the day humans will live there. And right now, somewhere else, brilliant engineers are drawing up plans to make that dream real, to turn Mars into our second home, our backup, the place humanity goes when Earth runs out of room or runs out of luck. It's one of the most inspiring stories we tell ourselves. And tonight, I want to walk you through what that story actually looks like when you strip away the music and the movie trailers and the promises, and you just sit down with the cold, hard numbers. Because here's the thing nobody likes to say out loud. The problem with colonizing Mars isn't a problem we can solve by building a better rocket. It isn't a problem of willpower or funding or genius. The deepest problems with Mars are written into the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology themselves, and you cannot engineer your way around a law of nature. I want to be clear about something before we start. This isn't going to be a video that tells you space is bad, or that we shouldn't explore, or that the people dreaming about Mars are fools. They're not. The dream is beautiful. The engineering is some of the most impressive work our species has ever done. But there's a difference between visiting a place and living there. There's a difference between planting a flag and building a home. And the gap between those two things on Mars is so vast, so brutal, and so unforgiving that by the end of tonight, you may never look at that little red dot the same way again. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this one layer at a time. We'll start with the things that would kill you in the first few minutes on the surface. Then we'll move to the things that would kill you over the first few weeks, then the first few years, and then finally we'll get to the deepest problems of all. The ones that wouldn't kill you at all, but might be even more terrifying than the ones that would. The slow, quiet, biological, and human problems that no shielding, no technology, and no amount of money can fix. If you find this kind of honest, deep exploration valuable, a quick like or subscribe genuinely helps this channel keep making videos like this one. It's a small thing, but it matters. Now, let's begin. Let's go to Mars. And let's find out, layer by layer, exactly what it would take to survive there. And why, for now at least, it might be one of the hardest things our species has ever tried to do. Chapter 1. The Red Dot. We think we know. Before we talk about why Mars is so hostile, let's just get our bearings. Let's actually look at this world. Because most of what people picture in their heads is a little off, and the real picture matters for everything that follows. Mars is the fourth planet from the Sun. Earth is the third. On average, Mars orbits about 142 million miles from the Sun, which is roughly 228 million kilometers. Earth sits at about 93 million miles, or 150 million kilometers. So Mars is about 49 million miles farther out than we are. That extra distance matters more than you think, and we'll come back to it because it changes how much sunlight reaches the surface, how cold the planet gets, and how long it takes to send help. But hold that thought for now. In terms of size, Mars is small. Its diameter is around 4,200 miles, which is about 6,800 kilometers. Earth's diameter is nearly 8,000 miles, or about 12,700 kilometers. So Mars is roughly half the width of Earth. It's a little world. And yet, here's a fact that surprises a lot of people. Because Mars has no oceans, all of its surface is dry land. And when you add up all that dry land, it comes out to roughly the same as all the dry land on Earth combined. Every continent, every island, every desert and forest and mountain range on our planet laid out flat would be about the same area as the surface of Mars. That sounds promising, doesn't it? A whole planet's worth of land just sitting there, waiting for us. An entire new world to spread out across. And this is exactly where the dream takes hold, because in our minds, land equals opportunity. On Earth, if you have land, you have the foundation for a home. You have somewhere to grow food, build a house, raise a family. Land is the beginning of everything. But here's where the dream and the reality start to pull apart. Because every single acre of that Martian land, all of it, is more hostile to human life than the most extreme environment anywhere on Earth. And I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I mean it precisely. There is no place on Earth, not the dry valleys of Antarctica, not the summit of Everest, not the bottom of the Mariana Trench, not the heart of the Sahara, that comes anywhere close to how lethal the friendliest, warmest, most pleasant spot on Mars would be to an unprotected human being. Think about that for a second, because it's a strange and important idea. We have places on Earth we call uninhabitable. The South Pole, the Death Valley salt flats in summer, the so-called death zone above 26,000 feet on the highest mountains, where the air is so thin that your body is literally dying with every passing hour. These are the harshest places our planet has to offer, and humans struggle to survive in them even with the best equipment. And yet, every one of those places is a tropical paradise compared to the nicest neighborhood on Mars. On Earth, even our deadliest environments give you air to breathe and pressure to keep your blood from boiling. Mars gives you neither. Not anywhere. Not ever. So when you picture Mars, I want you to let go of the image of a slightly colder, slightly emptier desert. That picture is comforting, and it's wrong. The truth is that Mars is not a harsh version of a place we know. It's a fundamentally different category of environment, one where the basic conditions for human life simply do not exist and have to be manufactured every second of every day with zero margin for error. And to understand just how unforgiving that really is, we have to start with the most basic thing of all, the thing you're doing right now without even noticing: breathing. Because the very first thing Mars would take from you is the air. Chapter 2: The Air That Isn't There. Take a breath right now. Go ahead. Feel how easy that was? You didn't think about it. You didn't plan it. Your body just did it, the way it has every few seconds of your entire life. the way it will keep doing whether you pay attention or not. That breath cost you nothing. It was free, automatic, invisible. On Mars, that single breath you just took without thinking would be the most precious and complicated thing in your entire world. So let's talk about why. When we say Mars has an atmosphere, we're being generous. Technically, yes, there is a layer of gas surrounding the planet, but to call it air, in the way you and I understand air, is almost a cruel joke. Here's the number that matters. The atmospheric pressure at the surface of Mars is about 0.6% of what you're experiencing right now at sea level on Earth. Let me say that a different way so it really lands. If Earth's atmosphere were a deep, full swimming pool of air pressing down on you, Mars's atmosphere would be a thin film of moisture at the very bottom. It's almost nothing. Let's put real units on it. At sea level on Earth, the atmosphere presses down on every square inch of your body with about 14.7 pounds of force. You don't feel it because you evolved inside it, and your body pushes back with equal pressure from the inside. It's the ocean you were born in. On Mars, that same square inch feels a pressure of about 0.09 pounds, not 14, not even 1, less than 1/10 of a single pound. To find air that thin here on Earth, you would have to climb to about 100,000 feet above the ground. And here's the thing, we don't even call that altitude the sky anymore. Pilots and scientists consider 100,000 feet to be the edge of space. So the entire surface of Mars, every valley, every crater, every low point on the whole planet, sits in conditions we would classify as space if they happened here on Earth. Now, there's a specific threshold I need to tell you about because it's one of the most chilling facts in all of this. It's called the Armstrong limit. It's the altitude, roughly 62,000 feet up, above which the air pressure drops so low that water boils at the temperature of the human body. 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. 37 degrees Celsius. Not boiling because it's hot. Boiling because there's so little pressure holding the liquid together that it simply tears itself apart into vapor. And the entire surface of Mars, all of it sits far, far above the Armstrong limit, permanently. So let me tell you, plainly and without drama, exactly what would happen if you stepped out onto the surface of Mars in your ordinary clothes with no pressure suit. This isn't a horror story I'm inventing. We know this with precision because we have, tragically, learned what happens to the human body in near vacuum from a small number of accidents in the history of spaceflight. So here is the truth. In the first few seconds, the moisture on the surfaces of your body, the saliva on your tongue, the wetness of your eyes, the lining of your lungs, would begin to bubble and boil away. Not painfully hot, but boiling all the same, because the pressure is so low that liquid water at your body temperature can't stay liquid. Your body would start to swell, not explosively like in the movies, but noticeably as the gases dissolved in your tissues expanded with nowhere to go. The air would rush out of your lungs because at that pressure, your lungs cannot hold it, and trying to hold your breath would only injure you. Within about 10 to 15 seconds, the lack of oxygen reaching your brain would make you lose consciousness. You wouldn't feel much after that, and within roughly 1 to 2 minutes, you would be gone, quietly, in a cold so deep and an emptiness so total that your body would be in conditions we'd call outer space, even though your feet would be standing on solid ground. That's the pressure problem. But there's a second problem layered on top of it. And even if you somehow solved the first, the second would still kill you. It's the composition of the air itself, even if Mars had Earth like pressure. Even if you could stand on the surface without your fluids boiling, you still could not breathe it. Because Martian air is about 95% carbon dioxide, the same gas you exhale as waste, the same gas that in a sealed room on Earth would slowly suffocate you as it built up. On Mars, it's almost the entire atmosphere. There's about 3% nitrogen, a bit under 2% argon, and oxygen, the thing your brain cannot survive without for more than a few minutes. It makes up about 0.13% of the Martian atmosphere. A rounding error, a trace. Functionally, there's no oxygen on Mars at all. Compare that to the air filling your lungs right now. Earth's atmosphere is about 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, less than 1% argon, and only about 0.04% carbon dioxide. We live in a world perfectly, almost impossibly tuned for our biology. 1/5 of every breath is the exact gas our cells need to turn food into energy and keep us alive. On Mars, breathing the native air would be like trying to breathe pure exhaust fumes in a vacuum in a freezer. It would fail on every level at once. And this is the part I really want you to sit with, because it sets the tone for everything else we're going to talk about tonight. On Earth, air is the background of existence. It's the thing so constant and so free that we built our entire biology around, assuming it would always be there. On Mars, air becomes a manufactured product. Every breath drawn by every colonist for every second of every day for the rest of their lives would have to be produced, pressurized, purified, and contained by machines. Machines that need power, machines that can break, machines behind walls that have to hold back the vacuum in a place where a single crack, a single failed seal, a single power outage at the wrong moment doesn't mean discomfort. It means that 2-minute countdown begins for everyone inside. We breathe without thinking. On Mars, breathing would be the thing you could never stop thinking about. And believe it or not, this is just the first layer, because the next thing Mars would do to you, even if your air held, is freeze you. So let's talk about the cold. Chapter 3. A cold you can't imagine. Let's say you've solved the air. You're inside a sealed habitat, breathing manufactured oxygen at proper pressure. You're safe from the boiling, the swelling, the suffocation. Good. Now step over to the window and look outside, because the next thing Mars wants to do to you is turn you into ice. And the cold of Mars is not the cold you think it is. It's not a winter day. It's not even the worst winter day Earth has ever recorded. It's something stranger and deeper than that. And to understand it, we have to throw out our everyday sense of what cold even means. Here's the surprising part: Mars can actually have a pleasant afternoon. On a summer day, at the equator, at the warmest spot on the entire planet, the temperature can climb to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around 21 degrees Celsius. That's a beautiful day. That's a temperature you'd happily wear a t-shirt in. If someone told you only that one number, you might think Mars sounds almost livable. But that number is a trick. It's the peak. It's the single warmest moment in the single warmest place on the single warmest day of the Martian year. It's the exception that hides the rule. Because here's what happens to that same spot, that same pleasant equatorial location, once the sun goes down. By night, the temperature crashes to roughly minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about minus 73 degrees Celsius. Let that sink in. The same patch of ground that was a comfortable 70 degrees in the afternoon plunges to 100 below zero by night. That's a temperature swing of around 170 degrees Fahrenheit in a single day at a single location. Nothing on Earth does that. The most extreme deserts on our planet, places famous for their brutal day-night temperature swings, might vary by 70 or 80 degrees. Mars routinely doubles that every single day. And that's just the nice spot. The average temperature across the whole planet, day and night, pole to equator, all of it averaged together, is about minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around minus 62 degrees Celsius. To give you a reference point you can feel in your bones, the coldest natural temperature ever recorded on the surface of the Earth was about minus 128 degrees Fahrenheit, measured in the heart of Antarctica, in the dead of the Antarctic winter, at one of the most hostile spots our planet has ever produced. That was a record, a once-in-history extreme that we still talk about decades later. On Mars, a temperature like that wouldn't be a record. It would be a fairly ordinary cold night. Mars lives as a matter of routine in a cold that Earth has touched only once, at its most savage extreme. Now, why is Mars so cold? It's not only because it's farther from the sun, though that's part of it. The deeper reason connects directly back to what we talked about a moment ago, the atmosphere, or rather, the near total absence of one. Here on Earth, our thick atmosphere works like a blanket wrapped around the whole planet. During the day, it lets sunlight in to warm the ground. At night, it traps a good portion of that heat, holding it close to the surface, releasing it slowly. That blanket is the reason the temperature doesn't collapse the moment the sun sets. It's the reason a warm afternoon becomes a cool evening instead of a lethal freeze. It moderates everything. It smooths the extremes. Mars has almost no blanket at all. Its whisper-thin atmosphere, that same 0.6% we talked about, can hold almost no heat. So when the sun is up and shining on a patch of Martian ground, that ground warms a little. But the instant the sun dips below the horizon, the heat doesn't linger. It radiates straight out into the blackness of space, almost immediately, with nothing to hold it back. The warmth just leaves, all at once, and the cold rushes in. This is why the temperature swings are so violent. There's no atmospheric memory, no thermal cushion, nothing to carry the day's warmth into the night. Every single Martian night, the heat the surface gathered during the day simply escapes into the void. So, what does this mean for anyone trying to live there? It means that warmth, like air, becomes something you have to manufacture constantly, forever, with no help from nature. On Earth, even in a brutal climate, the environment gives you something to work with. A house in Alaska only needs to make up the difference between the cold outside and the warm inside, and the Earth's own systems, the atmosphere, the ground, do part of the work. On Mars, the environment gives you nothing. It is actively, relentlessly pulling heat away from anything you try to keep warm. Every second, on a planet that's routinely 3 times colder than the point where water freezes solid. And this isn't just about human comfort. It's about everything you'd bring with you and everything you'd build. Water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. Mars is, on average, more than 100 degrees colder than that, which means every drop of water, every liquid, every chemical process, every biological system, every plant, every machine that relies on something flowing rather than frozen would turn solid the moment it lost its heat source. Metal grows brittle in extreme cold. Seals shrink and crack. Lubricants stiffen. Batteries lose their charge. The cold isn't just trying to freeze you, it's trying to freeze your entire civilization all the time. So now we have 2 layers: the air that would kill you in 2 minutes, and the cold that would freeze everything you depend on the moment the power flickered. And maybe you're thinking, all right, but these are engineering problems. We build sealed habitats. We pump in oxygen. We heat them with nuclear power. Hard, yes, but solvable. And you'd be right. These first 2 layers, as deadly as they are, can in principle be engineered against. We know how to make a pressurized, heated box. But here's where the story turns. Because the next layer that Mars throws at you cannot be stopped by a wall or a heater or a tank of oxygen. It passes straight through your habitat. It passes straight through your body. You can't see it. You can't feel it. And over the years, it quietly rewrites the very cells you're made of. It's the thing that may be the single greatest obstacle to anyone ever truly living on Mars. And it's time we talked about it. Let's talk about radiation. Chapter 4: The Invisible Rain. There's a kind of danger that's almost worse than the ones we've talked about so far. The air and the cold are honest. They announce themselves. You know in an instant if your suit fails or your heater dies. The danger we're about to discuss tells you nothing. You can't see it, can't smell it, can't feel it. It doesn't hurt when it hits you. You could stand on the surface of Mars in a perfectly sealed, perfectly heated suit, feeling completely fine, and all the while this danger would be passing through you. Through the suit, through your skin, through the strands of DNA coiled inside your cells, leaving tiny breaks and errors behind. Day after day, year after year, this is radiation, and it might be the single most important reason that living on Mars, really living there, for years, for a lifetime, may be far harder than anyone wants to admit. To understand the danger, we first have to understand why you're safe right now. Because you are. Sitting where you are, you're being protected by two enormous, invisible shields that you never think about, the same way you never think about the air. The first shield is Earth's magnetic field. Deep inside our planet, there's a vast ocean of molten iron, churning and swirling as the Earth spins, and that motion generates a magnetic field that reaches far out into space, wrapping the entire planet in an invisible protective bubble. We call it the magnetosphere, and its job, the job it's been doing for billions of years, is to catch and deflect the storm of charged particles constantly streaming off the sun, the solar wind, sweeping most of it harmlessly around the planet before it can ever reach the ground. The second shield is the atmosphere itself, that thick blanket we keep coming back to. Whatever radiation does make it past the magnetic field still has to punch through miles and miles of dense air to reach the surface, and most of it doesn't make it. The atmosphere absorbs it, scatters it, soaks it up. Between these two shields, the magnetic field out in space and the atmosphere down low, the amount of harmful radiation that actually reaches you at the surface of Earth is tiny. You get a little from cosmic rays sneaking through, a little from natural radioactivity in the rocks and soil, but under normal circumstances, it's nothing your body can't handle. You evolved inside this protection. It's part of why you're alive. Mars has neither shield, and the story of how it lost them is, in a strange way, the story of the whole planet's tragedy. Billions of years ago, Mars was a different world. It was warmer, wetter, it had rivers and lakes, maybe even an ocean. And crucially, it had a churning molten core, just like Earth, which means it almost certainly had a magnetic field, a protective bubble of its own. But Mars is small, only about half Earth's size, and small things cool faster than large things. Over hundreds of millions of years, that little core cooled and slowed and largely solidified. And when the churning stopped, the magnetic field died. Today, all that's left are faint patches of magnetism frozen into the ancient crust, scattered ghosts of a shield that vanished eons ago. With the magnetic field gone, the solar wind had nothing to stop it. And over the next billion years or so, it did something almost unimaginable. It slowly stripped Mars of most of its atmosphere, blowing it away into space, particle by particle, until the thick blanket dwindled to the thin whisper we find today. So Mars lost both shields, and it lost them together, in a slow cascade of ruin. No magnetic field, and therefore, eventually, almost no atmosphere, which means that today, the radiation from space reaches the surface of Mars almost completely unopposed. So let's talk numbers, because this is where it gets real, and I'm going to give you reference points all along the way, so these numbers actually mean something. Radiation dose is measured in units called millisieverts. Don't worry about the word, just track the numbers with me. The average person living on Earth receives about 2 to 3 millisieverts per year from all the natural background radiation around them. That's your baseline, your normal, the dose your body shrugs off without trouble. A single chest x-ray gives you about zero point 0.1 millisieverts. A full CT scan, one of the bigger medical doses you can get, runs around 10 millisieverts. And for people who work around radiation for a living, nuclear plant workers and the like, most countries set the legal annual limit at about 20 millisieverts per year. That's considered the responsible ceiling, the line you're not supposed to cross. Hold those numbers in your head. 2 to 3 for a normal year, 20 as the legal limit for a professional. Now here's Mars. Thanks to direct measurements from NASA's Curiosity rover, which has been sitting on the surface taking readings for years, we know that the radiation dose on the surface of Mars is roughly 24 millisieverts per month. Not per year, per month, which works out to something like 290 millisieverts per year, just from standing on the surface under normal conditions. Let me line that up for you so the scale is unmistakable. A person on Mars would absorb in a single year nearly 100 times the natural dose an Earth person gets, and close to 15 times the annual limit we legally allow for radiation workers every year, continuously, for as long as they stayed. And remember that 290 is the calm number. That's a normal year. When the sun grows more active, the dose climbs higher. And during what's called a solar particle event, a sudden violent burst of radiation flung out by a solar flare, the dose can spike enormously in just a few hours. A single major event could deliver hundreds of millisieverts in an afternoon, on top of everything else. To really feel the weight of these numbers, let me give you one more comparison, and it's a sobering one. After the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the authorities set an evacuation threshold. If you were going to receive more than 50 millisieverts in the first year, you were ordered to leave. That was the line at which a place was considered too dangerous to remain. On Mars, you would cross that entire yearly evacuation threshold in roughly 2 months. The radiation level that emptied towns around Chernobyl and turned them into an exclusion zone is a level you'd blow past about 6 times over every single year you lived on Mars. So, what does that actually do to a human body? The most well-known consequence is cancer. And the math is grim but straightforward. As a rough rule, for every 100 millisieverts of radiation you absorb, your lifetime risk of cancer rises by about 0.5%. On Mars, pulling in around 290 millisieverts a year, your cancer risk climbs by roughly 1.5% annually. After 10 years, if the effects simply add up, that's about a 15% increase. After 20 years, around 30%. And that's piled on top of the baseline risk we all already carry, which for most people is already somewhere around 40% over a lifetime. So a colonist's odds of facing cancer at some point could climb from roughly 40% to 55% after a decade, and toward 70% after 2. Living on Mars, in this sense, would mean slowly trading away your long-term health just by being there. But here's something most people don't realize: cancer might actually be one of the slower, less immediate worries. Radiation doesn't only threaten to create tumors, it damages cells throughout the entire body, all the time. It clouds the lenses of the eyes, causing cataracts that fog your vision over the years. It injures the cardiovascular system, raising the risk of heart disease. And perhaps most troubling of all, it appears to harm the brain and nervous system. Studies of astronauts exposed to far less radiation than Mars would deliver have found worrying signs, hints that this kind of exposure may accelerate cognitive decline, erode memory, impair decision making, and possibly raise the risk of neurodegenerative disease later in life. Imagine that. The very organ you'd need sharpest to survive on a hostile world, slowly being dulled by the invisible rain you can't even feel. And then there's the cruelest dimension of all, the effect on the next generation. Sperm cells and egg cells are especially vulnerable to radiation. High exposure can cause temporary or even permanent infertility. And even when colonists remained able to have children, radiation damage to those reproductive cells could introduce genetic mutations, raising the risk of birth defects in children who hadn't even been conceived yet. The radiation wouldn't just be rewriting the colonists, it would reach forward in time and rewrite their children too. Now, at this point, the obvious response is, well, we'll just shield against it. Build thick walls, bury the habitats, pile dirt on top. And you're right, that does help. Shielding is real and it works. But the moment you start to actually work out how much shielding you'd need and what it would take to put it in place on Mars, you run into a wall, almost literally. And that's where we're headed next. Because protecting yourself from this invisible rain turns out to be a far heavier problem, in the most literal sense of the word, than it first appears. Chapter 5: The Weight of Safety. So we need to shield against the radiation. Simple enough in concept. Put something solid between the colonists and the sky, and let it soak up the invisible rain before it reaches their bodies. This is exactly what Earth's atmosphere does for us, just with miles of air instead of a wall. So how much wall would it take? How much solid material do you need to pile between a human being and the Martian sky to bring the radiation down to something like the safe levels we enjoy on Earth? The answer is about 3 meters, roughly 10 feet. 10 feet of Martian soil packed over your habitat to absorb enough radiation to make the inside reasonably safe. Now, 10 feet of dirt might not sound like much. You could dig a 10-foot hole in an afternoon back on Earth. But this is where we have to stop talking about thickness and start talking about weight, because weight is where this whole idea gets crushing. Martian soil, which scientists call regolith, has a density of around 1.5 grams per cubic centimeter. When you do the arithmetic, 3 meters of that regolith piled over a habitat works out to about 4,500 kilograms sitting on every single square meter of roof. In units that might hit harder, that's roughly 9,000 pounds, pressing down on every square meter. Let's make it concrete. Picture a fairly modest habitat, something with a floor area of about 100 square meters, which is around 1,000 square feet. Roughly the size of a small apartment. To shield just the roof of that one small structure, you would need to pile on about 450,000 kilograms of regolith. That's around 500 tons. 500 tons of dirt on the roof of a single small home. And that's only the roof. The walls need shielding too because radiation comes in from the sides, not just straight down. Now think about what it would actually take to move 500 tons of dirt. On Earth, with bulldozers and excavators and dump trucks and unlimited diesel fuel and a crew of workers, moving 500 tons of soil is already a serious construction project. It's not something you do casually. Now strip all of that away. Put yourself on Mars. You have a tiny crew, maybe a handful of people. You have limited equipment because every machine had to be flown across tens of millions of miles of space at staggering cost. You have no fuel infrastructure, no gas stations, no supply chain. And every one of those workers is wearing a bulky, exhausting pressure suit that makes every movement slow and tiring, that we'll talk more about later. Suddenly, moving 500 tons of dirt isn't a construction project. It's an epic undertaking that could consume your tiny colony's labor and energy for a very long time. And here's the part that makes it even harder. The habitat underneath all that weight has to be strong enough to hold it up. Think about everything that one structure has to do at the same time. It has to support 500 tons of dirt pressing down from above. It has to hold full Earth-like air pressure on the inside, constantly pushing outward against the near vacuum of Mars, which means it's essentially a balloon trying to burst, with a mountain of soil sitting on top of it. It has to stay perfectly airtight because any leak starts that 2-minute countdown we talked about. And it has to stay thermally insulated, holding warmth against the cold that's pulling heat away every second. Building a single structure that does all of those things at once, supports immense weight, holds pressure, stays sealed, stays warm, is an engineering challenge well beyond almost anything we routinely build here on Earth, where we don't have to fight all of those battles simultaneously. So maybe you think we don't pile dirt on top. Maybe we go the other way. Maybe we go underground, dig down, tunnel into the planet, or find a natural cave, or shelter inside one of the lava tubes that scientists believe exist on Mars, the hollow tunnels left behind by ancient volcanic flows. And it's true, this is a genuinely promising idea. Put enough rock between you and the sky, and the radiation problem largely solves itself. If you can find a suitable cave or tube, nature has done the shielding for you. But of course, Mars doesn't give you anything for free, and digging underground trades one set of problems for another. Excavation on Mars is brutally difficult. The ground is frozen and hard. Your heavy digging equipment, again, all of it had to be shipped from Earth. And the soil you're digging through is laced with something genuinely nasty, a class of toxic chemicals that we'll get to very soon, that corrodes equipment and poisons people. And then there's the dust, the Martian dust, which gets into everything, which we also need to talk about in its own right. Because here's a theme that's beginning to emerge, and it's worth naming directly. On Mars, every solution creates a new problem. You shield against radiation by piling on dirt, and now you have a crushing weight and an impossible structural challenge. You avoid the weight by going underground, and now you're fighting frozen ground, toxic soil, and choking dust. There's no clean answer. There's no move that doesn't cost you somewhere else. Each layer of survival you build sits on top of another problem you haven't solved yet, all the way down. And two of those problems, the toxic chemicals in the soil and the dust that coats everything, are serious enough that they deserve their own chapter. Because they're not just inconveniences. On Mars, the very ground beneath your feet is quite literally trying to poison you. Let's talk about the dust and the poison hiding inside it. Chapter 6: The Poison in the Ground. When you picture an explorer on Mars, you probably imagine them walking across clean, rust-colored sand, leaving crisp footprints behind, like the famous boot prints on the moon. It's a romantic image. It's also dangerously incomplete, because that beautiful red dust isn't inert, and it isn't clean. It's one of the most quietly hostile things on the entire planet, and it would be working against the colonists every single day in two completely different ways. First, physically, and second, chemically. Let's take them one at a time, because both matter. Start with the physical problem. Martian dust is incredibly, almost unbelievably fine. We're not talking about sand, the gritty stuff you shake out of your shoes at the beach. Martian dust is finer than that. Finer, even, than talcum powder. The individual particles are only a few micrometers across, small enough to hang in the thin air, small enough to work their way into the tiniest gaps. And on top of being fine, the dust is electrostatically charged. It carries a static cling, which means it doesn't just settle and stay put. It sticks to everything, to suits, to tools, to seals, to solar panels, to visors, to machinery. It clings the way a balloon clings to your hair after you rub it, except it's a planet's worth of toxic powder, and it does not want to let go. We actually have a preview of how bad this gets, and it comes from the moon. During the Apollo missions, the astronauts only spent a few days on the lunar surface, and lunar dust, which shares many of these clingy, abrasive qualities, turned out to be one of their biggest headaches. It got into everything despite every precaution. It scratched their helmet visors. It ground down the seals on their equipment. It clung to their suits and rode back inside the lander with them. And when they took their helmets off, several astronauts reported the smell of it and irritation in their throats and lungs from the tiny amount that had gotten loose inside the cabin. And that was after just a few days. Now imagine not a few days, but years. Imagine that same relentless, infiltrating dust, getting into every airlock cycle, every suit, every machine, every joint and hinge and seal, for the entire duration of a colony's existence. The dust would never stop trying to get inside. And over years, it would win, a little at a time. But the physical problem, as bad as it is only half the story. because Martian dust hides a chemical menace. And this is the part that turns it from a nuisance into a genuine poison. Throughout the Martian soil, mixed all through that fine red dust, are compounds called perchlorates. The phoenix salander, which touched down near the Martian Arctic, measured them directly and found concentrations of around 0.5% by weight in the soil. 0.5% might not sound like much, but the crucial fact is that it's everywhere, blended uniformly through the regolith across the planet. The poison isn't in one place you can avoid. It's in the ground itself, wherever you go. And perchlorates are toxic to the human body in a specific and insidious way. They interfere with the thyroid gland, the small but vital gland in your neck that regulates your metabolism. Perchlorates block the thyroid's ability to take up iodine, which it needs to function. Chronic exposure can lead to hypothyroidism, throwing off your metabolism, draining your energy, and undermining your overall health over time. On top of that, perchlorates are powerful oxidizers, chemically reactive in ways that can be dangerous around organic material under the right conditions. So this is the soil that would coat every returning spacesuit. This is the dust that would, despite everyone's best efforts, slowly work its way into the habitats. Colonists would be living with low-level exposure to a thyroid-disrupting toxin, breathed in tiny amounts day after day for years. And we genuinely don't know the full long-term consequences because no human has ever lived in a perchlorate-rich environment for years on end. But it is very, very unlikely to be good. And the perchlorate problem reaches even deeper than personal health, because it strikes directly at one of the colony's most essential goals, growing food. The dream of Mars agriculture often involves the image of crops growing in Martian soil, the colony becoming self-sufficient, feeding itself from the land. But you cannot simply scoop up Martian dirt and plant seeds in it. That soil is laced with a thyroid poison. Before it could grow anything safely, the soil would have to be extensively washed to flush the perchlorates out. And washing soil requires large amounts of water, which, as we'll see very soon, is one of the scarcest and most precious resources on the entire planet. And after you washed it, the wash water itself would now be contaminated with perchlorates and would have to be treated before it could be used again. So even the simple act of preparing dirt to grow a tomato becomes a chemical decontamination process that consumes your rarest resource and generates toxic waste you then have to clean up. Do you see the pattern tightening? Every door you open on Mars reveals another locked door behind it. You want to shield against radiation, so you go underground, where you have to dig through toxic, dusty soil. You want to grow your own food in that soil, but first you have to poison wash it using water you don't have. And that brings us unavoidably to the resource that everything else depends on. The resource that is life itself, the one thing no colony can manufacture out of nothing, the thing Mars hoards and hides and makes you fight for every single drop of. Water. Let's talk about water. Chapter 7. Every drop you'll ever drink. On Earth, water is the easiest thing in the world to take for granted. You turn a handle and it appears. It falls from the sky for free. It pools in lakes, runs in rivers, fills the oceans. When you drink a glass of water, you don't think about where it came from, and you don't think about where it goes. And the reason you don't have to think about it is that Earth runs a vast, ancient, self-sustaining machine called the water cycle. The sun evaporates water from the oceans. It rises, forms clouds, falls as rain and snow. It flows down rivers, soaks into the ground, feeds the wells and the springs, and eventually returns to the sea to begin again. It has been running for billions of years, completely for free, and it refills everything we use. Drink a glass, and the cycle quietly replaces it. That machine is so reliable, so constant, that we built our entire civilization on the assumption it would always be there. Mars has no such machine. There is no water cycle on Mars. None. It does not rain. It does not snow in any way that helps you. There are no rivers, no flowing streams, no lakes to dip a bucket into. Whatever water a colony uses is simply gone unless they capture and reclaim it themselves. There is no natural process anywhere on the planet that will replace a single drop. And that one fact changes the entire psychology of water. On Earth, water is a flow, something that moves through your life and renews itself. On Mars, water is a fixed quantity, a treasure you possess, and every drop you lose is a drop you have to claw back out of a frozen, stingy planet through enormous effort. Now, to be clear, there is water on Mars. That's not the problem. The problem is the form it's in and the work it takes to get it. There's water frozen into the polar ice caps, locked up as ice. And there's water frozen underground, mixed into the soil as buried ice, especially at the higher latitudes farther from the equator. So the water exists, but getting it is another matter entirely. Take the polar ice caps. They're a frozen mixture of water ice and frozen carbon dioxide, dry ice. And they sit at the poles, which are the coldest places on an already brutally cold planet. To get water from them, you'd have to travel to the poles, mine the frozen mixture, separate the water ice from the dry ice, and then transport it all the way back to wherever your habitat is, which probably isn't at the pole because the poles are too cold and dark to live at comfortably. That's an enormous logistical operation just to fill your reservoir. The other option is to pull water out of the soil itself. At higher latitudes, there's likely water ice mixed into the regolith, just a few centimeters below the surface. To get it, you dig up the soil, heat it to drive the water out as vapor, capture and condense that vapor, and then purify it. And every step of that, the digging and especially the heating, demands energy. Lots of it. You'd be spending precious power to bake water out of frozen dirt over and over because, remember, there's no rain coming to refill anything. Every reservoir you fill stays full only until you use it. Then you have to go make more water from scratch forever. This is why, in practice, The real survival strategy on Mars isn't mining new water at all. It's refusing to waste the water you already have. A Mars colony would have to run what's called a closed-loop water recycling system, where essentially every drop of water gets captured, cleaned, and used again, and again, and again. Wastewater from sinks, water from showers, moisture from the air, even urine. All of it would be collected and run through intensive filtering and purification and turned back into clean drinking water. If that sounds extreme, know that we already do exactly this right now in orbit. On the International Space Station, the astronauts drink water recycled from their own urine and sweat and breath. The system there recovers about 93% of the water that passes through it. It's one of the great quiet triumphs of spaceflight engineering. But look closely at that number because it hides the whole problem. 93% recovery sounds fantastic, almost perfect. But that means 7% is still lost every cycle. Lost as vapor that escapes, or chemically locked into waste that can't be recovered. And on Mars, that 7% isn't a rounding error. It adds up relentlessly, and it has to be replaced by mining new water out of the ground. Let me put real numbers on it so you can feel the weight. Imagine a colony of 100 people. A person needs a surprising amount of water once you count not just drinking, but cooking, hygiene, washing, everything. So let's say a modest 50 liters per person per day. For 100 people, that's 5,000 liters of water flowing through the colony every single day. Now lose 7% of it. That's 350 liters gone every day that has to be replaced from scratch. Stretch that across a year, and the colony has to mine and process about 127,000 liters of brand new water just to cover the losses. And 127,000 liters of water weighs about 127 metric tons. So picture it. Every year, your colony of 100 people has to dig up, heat, condense, and purify roughly 127 tons of water out of the frozen Martian ground just to break even, just to stay in place, just to replace what leaked away, despite running one of the most efficient recycling systems ever built. And here's the part that should make you pause. That entire backbreaking 127 tons a year is only to keep 100 people alive with the basics. Drinking, cooking, washing. It includes nothing for agriculture. The moment you want to grow food to feed those people from Martian crops, the water demand doesn't tick up. It multiplies because plants are thirsty, and a colony that can't feed itself isn't a colony at all. It's just a very expensive, very temporary outpost, waiting for the next shipment from Earth, which leads us straight into the next layer. Because air, warmth, and water are only the foundation. They keep you alive from one day to the next, but they don't keep you alive across years. For that, you need calories. You need food. And growing food on Mars, it turns out, may be one of the hardest things of all. Let's talk about what it would take to eat. Chapter 8: The Problem of the Next Meal. Let's say you've got it all working. Air, heat, water, all flowing. all stable. Your colonists are alive and safe inside their shielded habitat. Now they get hungry. Because that's the thing about human beings. We don't just need to breathe and drink. We need to eat every day, several times a day for our entire lives. And on Mars, putting food in front of people turns out to be a problem with no easy answer, only a choice between hard ones. Start with the basic arithmetic of hunger. A person needs somewhere around 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day just to function. But the people on Mars wouldn't be lounging around. They'd be doing demanding physical work in a high-stress, hostile environment, hauling equipment, maintaining systems, working in those exhausting suits. Astronauts on the space station, doing far less physical labor, burn through about 2,500 to 3,500 calories a day. So let's call it a conservative 3,000 calories per person per day for our Mars colonists. For a colony of 100 people, that's 300,000 calories every single day. Over a year, it comes to roughly 110 million calories that the colony has to produce or import. That's the size of the hunger you're trying to feed. Now, the obvious first thought is just ship the food from Earth. And for the very first missions, that's exactly what they'll do. But you cannot run a colony on Earth food forever. And the reason is simple: launch capacity. Getting anything from Earth to Mars is staggeringly expensive and limited by how much a spacecraft can carry. Take the most optimistic vehicle on the horizon, something like SpaceX's Starship, which might one day haul 100 metric tons of cargo all the way to Mars in a single trip. That sounds like an enormous amount, but run the numbers. Freeze-dried food packs roughly 450 calories into every 100 grams. To supply 100 people with their 110 million calories for 1 year, you'd need about 24 metric tons of freeze-dried food. So one entire Starship, if you filled its whole 100-ton cargo hold with nothing but food, could feed 100 people for about 4 years. But of course, you can't fill it with nothing but food. That same cargo capacity has to carry everything else the colony needs: the equipment, the spare parts, the building materials, the scientific instruments, the medical supplies, the tools, the machines that make air and water and power. Food has to compete with all of it for every kilogram of space. So realistically, the early missions might carry a year or two of food as a buffer. And then the brutal truth sets in. The colony has to grow its own. It has no choice. Self-sufficiency in food isn't a nice goal on Mars. It's a survival deadline. So, can you grow food on Mars? In theory, yes. You build pressurized greenhouses. You bring soil from Earth, or you painstakingly clean and treat the local regolith to make it safe, washing out those perch lorets we talked about. You provide light, and you grow crops. Simple in concept. But every single piece of that plan runs into the same hostile planet we've been describing all along. And the challenges stack up fast. Take light. To start, Mars receives only about 43% of the sunlight that Earth does because it orbits so much farther from the sun. Less than half the light. That's enough to grow some crops, but it's far from ideal, and it means you'd likely need to supplement with artificial lighting. Powerful grow lights running on electricity. And electricity, as we'll see, is its own enormous problem on Mars. Then there's the sheer space required. To grow a full balanced diet for one person takes a surprising amount of growing area, somewhere in the range of 50 to 100 square meters per person, depending on the crops and how efficient your systems are. For 100 people, that's somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 square meters of growing space. That's 1 to 2 acres of farmland under glass on Mars. And now stack the greenhouse problem on top of the radiation problem, because here the two collide in a vicious way. Every one of those greenhouses has to be pressurized to near Earth-like pressure, roughly 100 times the pressure outside. So each greenhouse is, once again, a balloon straining to burst. Its walls constantly pushed outward by the air inside against the near vacuum of Mars. Building large, transparent, pressurized structures that can withstand that stress is extraordinarily difficult. But here's the cruel twist. To let sunlight in, those greenhouse walls have to be transparent. And if they're transparent, you can't pile 10 feet of radiation shielding on top of them the way you would for a habitat, which means the greenhouses and everything growing in them sit exposed to the full radiation of the Martian sky. Plants are tougher than people when it comes to radiation, but they're not immune. High radiation damages plant DNA, slows their growth, and reduces their yields. So your crops grow more poorly than they would on Earth, in less light, under a constant drizzle of radiation. And worse, the farmers, the human beings who have to go inside to tend those crops, are exposed too. Every hour a colonist spends working in a transparent, radiation-soaked greenhouse is another dose added to the toll on their body. You could solve that by moving the greenhouses underground, safe from radiation. But then you've cut them off from the sun entirely, and now you have to provide 100% of the light artificially with electricity, dramatically multiplying your power demands. There it is again, the same trap, closing on you from a new direction. Protect the crops from radiation, and you starve them of light and drown in energy costs. Give them sunlight, and you irradiate both the plants and the people. Every path forward costs you somewhere else. And notice what almost every one of these problems keeps quietly demanding. Light needs it, heating needs it, water mining needs it, air recycling needs it, pressurizing greenhouses needs it. Underneath every single system keeping a colonist alive, there's the same relentless requirement humming away, the one resource that powers all the others: energy. So now we have to ask the question that sits beneath everything else we've discussed. Where, on a frozen, airless, sunlight-starved planet, does all that energy come from? Let's talk about power. Chapter 9. The hunger for power. Everything we've talked about so far runs on one thing: heating the habitats against that 100 below cold. Runs on power. Pressurizing the air and recycling it so it stays breathable runs on power. Mining water out of frozen ground and purifying it runs on power. Lighting the greenhouses, growing the food, running the computers, the communications, the medical equipment, the machines that repair the other machines. All of it, every last system standing between a colonist and a quick death, runs on power. Energy isn't one problem among many on Mars. Energy is the foundation the entire colony stands on. Cut the power, and everything else fails at once. So, where does it come from? Here on Earth, we're spoiled for choices. We have fossil fuels, which, whatever their problems with the climate, are incredibly energy dense and easy to use. We have wind power, solar power, hydroelectric dams. We have nuclear reactors. We have an entire buffet of ways to generate electricity, built up over a century of industrial civilization. Now let's walk through that same menu on Mars and watch how one by one the options get crossed off the list. Fossil fuels? Gone immediately. Coal, oil, and natural gas exist on Earth because for hundreds of millions of years, living things grew, died, and got buried and compressed. Fossil fuels are, quite literally, the remains of ancient life. Mars never had that abundance of life, so it never made any coal or oil or gas. There is simply none to burn. Cross it off. Wind power? On Earth, a strong wind can spin a turbine and light up a town. But the power in wind depends on the density of the air pushing the blades. And Martian air, that whisper-thin atmosphere again, has only about 1% the density of Earth's, which means wind on Mars carries about 1% of the force. Here's a way to picture it that really lands. A 100 mile per hour gale screaming across the Martian surface would push on you with roughly the force of a gentle 1 mile per hour breeze on Earth. Barely enough to stir the dust, nowhere near enough to reliably turn a turbine. So those dramatic dust storms you might imagine powering the colony, they're almost energetically empty. Crosswind off the list too. Hydroelectric power? That needs flowing water, rivers, dams, falling water turning turbines. Mars has no rivers, no flowing water anywhere on its surface. Cross it off. So watch what's happened. In just a few sentences, we've eliminated most of the ways humanity generates energy. What's left, realistically, is two options, solar and nuclear. And both come with serious catches. Solar power on Mars is possible, but it fights an uphill battle. Remember, Mars gets only about 43% of the sunlight Earth does. So a solar panel there produces less than half what the same panel would make on Earth, right from the start. Then it gets worse because of dust. That fine, clingy dust we talked about settles on the panels and blocks the light. And there's no rain to wash them clean. They have to be cleared by hand, endlessly. And then there's the real nightmare for solar power, the global dust storms. Mars is famous for them. Several times in a Martian decade, a dust storm can swell up to cover the entire planet, darkening the sky and choking off the sunlight for weeks, sometimes for months at a time. We've watched what that does in real life. In 2018, a global dust storm swept across Mars and blotted out the sky. NASA's Opportunity rover, a solar-powered explorer that had been faithfully working for almost 15 years, an extraordinary lifespan, couldn't generate enough electricity through the darkened sky to keep itself alive. Its power drained away. NASA waited and hoped, sending signal after signal, praying it would wake up once the skies cleared. It never answered again. A months-long dust storm killed a rover that had survived everything Mars threw at it for a decade and a half. Now imagine that same storm, that same weeks or months-long darkness, falling over a colony of 100 human beings who depend on power to breathe, to stay warm, to drink. For them, relying on solar power alone would be a gamble with their lives, requiring enormous banks of batteries to ride out the dark, batteries that would be brutally heavy to ship from Earth and difficult to build on Mars. Which leaves nuclear. And honestly, for a serious colony, nuclear power is almost certainly the answer because it's the one source that doesn't care about the weather. A nuclear reactor produces steady, reliable power whether the sun is shining or buried under a planet-wide dust storm, day or night, summer or winter. It's the dependable heartbeat the colony would need. The catches are real. Transporting a reactor across space requires heavy shielding for safety during launch. Setting it up safely on Mars is a delicate operation, and you have to manage the nuclear waste in the Martian environment. But for keeping people alive through the dark months, there may be no real alternative. So how much power are we talking about? Estimates vary, but a settlement of around 100 people with full life support, food production, some manufacturing, and a little room to grow would likely need at least 1 megawatt of continuous power. 1,000 kilowatts, running non-stop. To give that a human scale, a typical American home uses, on average, about 1 kilowatt. So a 100-person Mars colony would need roughly the continuous power of 1,000 homes, generated reliably in the most hostile environment humans have ever tried to inhabit, with no power grid to fall back on and no electrician arriving in 20 minutes when something fails. 1 megawatt is achievable with today's technology. A small nuclear reactor could do it. But hauling it to Mars, installing it, and keeping it running flawlessly for decades is a monumental task. And if it ever stops, the countdown begins for everyone. So that's the foundation. Air, warmth, water, food, power. Build all 5. Perfectly, redundantly, and keep them running without fail. And you have done something extraordinary. You have kept human beings alive on Mars from one day to the next. But here's the unsettling thing. Even if you achieve all of that, even if every machine works perfectly forever, there's another problem waiting. And this one, you cannot build a machine to fix, because it isn't about the environment outside the habitat at all. It's about what Mars does to the human body itself, slowly from the inside, in a way no wall and no reactor can prevent. Let's talk about gravity. Chapter 10. What Mars does to the body. Up to now, every danger we've discussed has come from outside. The vacuum, the cold, the radiation, the toxic dust, they're all things the habitat is meant to keep out. Build a good enough wall, run a good enough machine, and in principle, you hold them at bay. But the next problem walks right through the wall because it's already inside you. It's woven into every bone and muscle and heartbeat in your body. And it's something so constant, so fundamental, that you have never once in your life thought about it. Gravity. Mars has about 38% of Earth's gravity. If you weigh 150 pounds on Earth, you'd weigh about 56 pounds on Mars. And the first reaction everyone has to that is that it sounds wonderful. Fun, even. You'd be light on your feet, able to leap and bound, like living on a permanent trampoline. And in the short term, sure, it might feel that way. But here's what makes gravity so quietly dangerous. Your body, every part of it, was tuned by millions of years of evolution to work in Earth's gravity. Exactly Earth's gravity. Your bones are as dense as they are because they have to hold you up against one full Earth gravity. Your muscles are as strong as they are because they fight that pull with every step. Your heart pumps as hard as it does because it has to push blood upward against it. Your sense of balance, the fluid in your inner ear, the very architecture of your circulatory system, all of it is calibrated for 1G, the gravity you were born into. Take that away, even partly, and the body, sensing it no longer needs all that strength, begins slowly to give it back. We know this is real, and we know it in frightening detail because we've watched it happen to astronauts in the near zero gravity of space stations. After months in orbit, the effects are dramatic. Bones lose density at a rate of about 1 to 2% every single month. A condition so consistent, it has its own name: spaceflight osteoporosis. Muscles waste away because they're no longer working against any meaningful load, and astronauts can lose up to 20% of their muscle mass on long missions. The heart itself weakens and deconditions because pumping blood is suddenly so much easier. In fact, when astronauts return to Earth after a long stay, many of them can't even stand up without nearly fainting because their cardiovascular system has adapted to a world without gravity and can no longer handle the simple act of keeping blood flowing to the brain while upright. Fluids shift upward in the body too, puffing up their faces and pressing on the optic nerve at the back of the eye, sometimes causing vision changes that persist even after they come home. The body, deprived of gravity, quietly disassembles the very strength it spent a lifetime building. But here's the crucial gap in our knowledge, and it's a big one. All of that data comes from zero gravity, from the weightlessness of orbit. We have decades of solid information about how the body behaves at 1G, that's life on Earth, and decades of data about how it behaves at 0G, that's the space stations. We even have a tiny scrap of data from the moon's gravity, about 1/6 of Earth's, from the Apollo missions. But those astronauts were only there for a few days, far too short to learn anything about long-term effects. And Mars sits right in the middle at 38% of Earth's gravity. And about what years of Martian gravity would do to a human body, we have essentially no data at all. None. Nobody has ever lived in it. Nobody has ever tested it. It is a complete and total unknown. And that unknown hides a genuinely frightening question. Is Mars gravity enough to protect the body or not? Maybe 38% of Earth's gravity is enough to slow the damage to a manageable trickle, so colonists lose bone and muscle, but slowly enough to live with. That's the hopeful possibility. But there's a darker one. It's entirely possible that there's a threshold, some minimum level of gravity the body needs to stay healthy, and that Mars falls below it, in which case colonists would suffer the same bone loss, the same muscle wasting, the same cardiac decline as astronauts in zero gravity, just at a somewhat slower pace, steadily weakening year after year, with no way to fully stop it. And we wouldn't know which of these is true until people had already gone and lived it with their own bodies. Now follow that thread forward, because it leads somewhere chilling. Suppose a colonist spends the 6-month journey to Mars in zero gravity, arriving already weakened. Then they spend years on Mars, in that uncertain 38% gravity, possibly weakening further the whole time. What happens if they ever want to come home? Returning to Earth would mean suddenly subjecting a body adapted to Martian gravity to 2.5 times the gravity it had grown used to. Everything would feel crushingly, impossibly heavy. Bones thinned by years of low gravity might not be able to bear the body's own weight. A person might suffer fractures simply from trying to stand. A heart grown accustomed to easy pumping might struggle to push blood against the full force of Earth. This is all unproven because we have no data, but it's a real and serious possibility that colonists could become so thoroughly adapted to Mars that they could never safely return to Earth. Stuck on Mars, not by choice, not by distance, but by their own physiology. Their own bodies would become the cage. And then there's the question that may be the most unsettling of all. Children. If a colony is ever to be truly self-sustaining, truly permanent, then at some point people will have children there. And we have to ask what 38% gravity would do to a developing human. What happens to a fetus growing in the womb under Martian gravity? What happens to a child growing up in it, whose bones and muscles and heart are forming for the very first time, not in Earth's gravity, but in a third of it? On Earth, a child's bones strengthen precisely because they're constantly stressed by gravity and movement. A child on Mars would grow under far less of that stress. Would their bones develop properly? Would they ever reach normal density? Would their hearts grow strong enough, their muscles firm enough? We have absolutely no idea. It's entirely possible, based on everything we understand about how bodies respond to stress, that children born and raised on Mars would grow up with fragile, underdeveloped skeletons, perhaps taller than Earth humans, because their spines were never compressed by full gravity, but with bones that break easily, hearts that are weaker, muscles that never had to fight. And if such a Mars-born child ever traveled to Earth, the planet their species evolved on, the home of all human history, they might be physically unable to handle it, unable to stand against the gravity, unable to walk without support, their bodies too delicate for the very world that made them. And that raises an ethical question with no comfortable answer. Is it right to have children on a world where we don't know if they'll develop normally? where there's a real chance they'll be born biologically trapped, unable ever to set foot on Earth. These aren't questions we can answer from here, but they're questions a Mars colony would be forced to live with, in the flesh, in the bodies of its own children. So the body itself becomes a frontier of risk that no engineering can fully secure. And if the physical toll is this uncertain and this deep, there's a parallel toll we haven't touched yet, one that's just as real, just as dangerous, and even harder to measure. Because surviving on Mars wouldn't only test the body, it would test the mind. Let's talk about what that kind of isolation does to a human being. Chapter 11: The Loneliest Place a Human Has Ever Been. We've spent a lot of time on the ways Mars could harm a body, but there's another kind of harm, quieter and harder to see, that may be just as dangerous to the survival of a colony. It doesn't show up on a radiation meter or a bone scan. It happens in the mind. Because human beings did not evolve to live the way you would have to live on Mars, and the psychological weight of that life might be one of the heaviest burdens of all. Picture your actual day on Mars. You wake up inside a sealed habitat, a box. You spend almost all of your time inside that box, and the box is connected to it, because every trip outside means suiting up in a cumbersome pressure suit and stepping into an environment that is actively, constantly trying to kill you with radiation, vacuum, cold, and toxic dust. The world outside the window is beautiful in its way, but it is utterly lifeless. No trees, no animals, no other people anywhere, in any direction for tens of millions of miles. Just red rock and pink sky and silence. And you know, every single day that the nearest other human beings who aren't in your colony are on a different planet. Now layer on the isolation that really defines Mars, the communication delay. When you send a message to Earth, to your family, to mission control, to anyone, it doesn't arrive instantly. It travels at the speed of light across the gulf between the planets. And depending on where Earth and Mars are in their orbits, that takes anywhere from about 4 minutes to about 24 minutes each way. So a simple back and forth, a question and an answer, can take anywhere from 8 to nearly 50 minutes. Think about what that does to a conversation. You cannot call your mother and talk to her. You can send her a message and then wait. And somewhere between 8 and 48 minutes later, her reply arrives, responding to a feeling you've already moved past. It's not a conversation. It's more like trading letters across the void. You can never again, for as long as you stay on Mars, have a real-time, back-and-forth talk with anyone you love who stayed behind. That alone is something no human being has ever had to endure for years on end. And then there's the hardest truth of the isolation. If something goes wrong, there is no help coming. None. On Earth, no matter how remote you are, there's some thread of rescue. A helicopter, a coast guard, an ambulance, someone who can reach you. On Mars, that thread is cut. Resupply ships can only come every 2 years. During the brief windows when Earth and Mars line up favorably in their orbits, if you run out of something critical, you don't wait an afternoon. You wait 2 years, or you improvise, or you do without. If there's an emergency, a fire, a breach, a medical crisis, you handle it yourselves with exactly the people and tools already on Mars because no one else can get to you in time. There is no calling for backup. You are the backup. You are the only backup there will ever be. We actually have a glimpse of what this kind of isolation does to people. And it comes from Antarctica, which is the closest thing Earth has to Mars. People who spend long winters at isolated Antarctic research stations, cut off, confined, in a hostile environment with the same small group of faces, are studied carefully, and the findings are sobering. They experience stress, depression, insomnia, irritability, interpersonal conflict, and sometimes serious psychological breakdowns. And here's the thing you have to hold on to. The people in Antarctica have it easy compared to Mars colonists. They know that if they truly need to, they can be evacuated. They can call home and actually have a conversation with no delay. They can look at a calendar and count down to when they'll leave. And above all, they're still on Earth, breathing real air under a real sky, with the whole machinery of human civilization theoretically within reach. And even with all of those comforts, the isolation breaks some of them. On Mars, every one of those comforts is gone. You can't be evacuated. You can't have a real conversation with home. You can't count down to leaving, because leaving might be years away and might not even be physically safe when the time comes. The psychological pressure would be unlike anything humans have faced. And it compounds because you're not alone. You're trapped with the same handful of people in close quarters under relentless stress indefinitely. On Earth, when people in a group start to grate on each other, they can separate, go for a drive, visit a friend, spend a weekend apart. On Mars, there is nowhere to go. You cannot get away from each other. Every annoyance, every disagreement, every personality clash gets magnified and trapped in the same sealed space, with no release valve. History tells us, from polar expeditions and submarine crews and space stations, that even the most carefully chosen teams develop tensions, arguments, and sometimes serious conflict under those conditions. And on Mars, those conflicts can't be walked away from. They just simmer. So you have to ask the hard questions that a Mars colony would actually face. What happens when someone who signed up full of excitement becomes disillusioned after years of confinement and danger and grinding hardship? What happens when depression sets in, as it surely would for some? How do you treat a genuine psychiatric crisis on Mars when there's no specialist, no hospital, no medication you didn't already bring, and no way to send the person somewhere safer? These aren't far-fetched what-ifs. In a colony of real human beings, living this way for years, mental health crises wouldn't be a possibility. They'd be a certainty, and the colony would have to find a way to carry its people through them, alone, with whatever it had. The mind, it turns out, may be just as fragile on Mars as the body, and far harder to repair. Chapter 12. The hardest part is coming home. Let's say a colonist has done it. They've survived the radiation, endured the isolation, lived for years on Mars, and somehow come through it. And now they want to go home. They want to see Earth again, feel real sunlight, breathe open air, hug the people they left behind. Surely, after everything, they've earned the trip back. Here's the cruel surprise: getting to Mars is hard. Getting back may be even harder. And for some colonists, going home might not be possible at all. To understand why, think first about how you even leave the surface of a planet. To get off Mars and head back toward Earth, you need a rocket, a real one, capable of pushing up off the ground, out of Mars's gravity, and onto a trajectory across tens of millions of miles of space. And that immediately creates a brutal problem. Where does that rocket and its fuel come from? You can't easily fly a fully fueled return rocket all the way to Mars and just leave it sitting there. The cost of hauling that much fuel across space is staggering. So the leading plan is far more audacious. The idea is to land on Mars with the rocket mostly empty and then manufacture the fuel right there on the surface out of Mars itself. This is called in situ resource utilization. And on paper, it's elegant. The plan is to pull carbon dioxide out of the Martian atmosphere, which, remember, is 95% carbon dioxide, so there's plenty of it, and to extract water from the ice in the ground. Then, using chemistry powered by your reactor, you combine them, you split the water into hydrogen and oxygen, you react the hydrogen with the carbon dioxide to produce methane, and you store the methane and oxygen as rocket fuel. In principle, Mars gives you everything you need to make the fuel to leave. But look at that chain of steps. Extract the water, split it with electricity, capture the carbon dioxide, run the reaction, liquefy the products, store them safely at brutal temperatures for the long stretch until launch. Every step needs power, reliable equipment, and time. And every step is a link in a chain. And a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. If any single step fails, if the water extractor breaks, if the reactor falters, if the chemistry plant jams, you don't get fuel. And if you don't get fuel, you don't leave. You're simply stranded on Mars, waiting, while the only people who could send you a spare part are a 2-year round trip away. But suppose it all works. Suppose the fuel gets made, the rocket launches, and the colonist is finally on their way home. The ordeal still isn't over, because the journey back takes another 6 to 9 months, the same as the trip out. And that means another 6 to 9 months in zero gravity, with all the bone loss, muscle wasting, and cardiac decline that come with it, layered on top of years already spent in Mars's weak gravity. So picture the state of this returning traveler. They've spent years at 38% gravity. Their body already adapted downward. Now they spend most of a year in zero gravity, weakening further. And then, at the end of it all, they arrive at Earth, and Earth hits them with one full gravity, more than 2.5 times what their body has known for years. We talked about this danger earlier, and here is where it comes due. For a colonist who has spent many years on Mars, that return to full Earth gravity might simply be more than their body can take. Bones thinned by years away might fracture under their own weight. A heart grown used to easy work might not be able to keep blood flowing against the sudden pull. For the youngest and healthiest, who spent only a short time away, readaptation might be possible, painful, but survivable. But for older colonists, or those who spent many years on Mars, the trip home might not be survivable at all. And so we arrive at one of the most quietly devastating truths of Mars colonization. The return ticket is not guaranteed. For some people who go, Mars wouldn't be a place they visited. It would be the place they went to stay, whether they meant to or not. The journey there might be a one-way door, locked behind them not by anyone's decision, but by the slow, unarguable arithmetic of their own physiology. So far, we followed the colonists through the dangers of living on Mars and the dangers of trying to leave. But there's a problem we haven't touched yet, one that doesn't threaten any single person's body or mind, but threatens the entire colony's existence from a completely different direction. It's not physical, it's not biological, it's economic. Because a Mars colony, no matter how well engineered, would face a financial reality so harsh that it might be the thing that dooms the whole project, not with a bang, but with a budget. Let's talk about money. Ending the pale blue dot. So let's gather it all together, everything we've uncovered tonight, and see the full shape of it at last. We began with a simple, beautiful dream, the red dot in the night sky becoming humanity's second home. And then, layer by layer, we found out what that dream actually demands. We found an atmosphere so thin it would kill an unprotected human in about 2 minutes, boiling the water in their body at the temperature of their own blood. We found a cold so deep that the most pleasant afternoon on Mars crashes to 100 degrees below zero by nightfall. A cold Earth has touched only once, at its most savage extreme. We found radiation pouring down on a world that lost both its shields long ago, dosing colonists with the equivalent of crossing the Chernobyl evacuation threshold 6 times over every year. We found soil laced with poison, dust that creeps into everything, water that has to be wrung from frozen ground, drop by precious drop, and food that has to be grown in balloons of glass beneath a drizzle of radiation. We found that the very gravity of the place might quietly disassemble the human body, might trap colonists on Mars by reshaping their bones, might leave children born there, unable ever to walk on the world their species came from. We found isolation that breaks the mind, a return journey that might not be survivable, and an economic reality so harsh that the whole colony would hang forever on a line in a budget back on Earth. These are not minor obstacles to be brushed aside with enough optimism. Some are engineering problems we might one day solve, but others are fundamental walls set by physics and biology that no cleverness can simply knock down. And that's the honest, sobering truth about colonizing Mars. It is far, far harder than the bright and hopeful version lets on. Maybe, someday, with technologies we can't yet imagine, genetic engineering that hardens the body against radiation and low gravity, artificial gravity we don't know how to build, fusion power that makes energy limitless, breakthroughs that make all of this manageable. Maybe then it becomes possible, but that's a far future. With what we have now and what we'll likely have for decades, Mars colonization remains extraordinarily difficult, extraordinarily dangerous, and far less certain than the dream suggests. The pioneers who go first will be among the bravest human beings who ever lived, facing a world that is trying to end them every moment of every day. And some of them, in all honesty, won't come home. But I don't want to leave you in despair, because there's another way to look at all of this, and I think it's the truest way of all. Because here's the strange gift hidden inside everything we've discussed tonight. Every terrifying fact about Mars is, secretly, a love letter to Earth. Think about it. Everything Mars cannot give you, Earth gives you for free this very second, without your even noticing. The breath you just took, drawn from an atmosphere perfectly tuned to your body, that breath that would be impossible on Mars. You got it here for nothing. The comfortable temperature around you, held steady by a planet wrapped in exactly the right blanket of air. The water that falls from the sky and runs in the rivers and waits in your tap, refilled endlessly by a machine that's been running for billions of years. The invisible shields, the magnetic field, and the thick atmosphere that have been quietly catching the radiation meant for you your entire life, so that you could walk outside under the sun and feel only warmth, the gravity that built your bones, and that you can stand in without a second thought. The life all around you, the green of plants, the sound of birds, the company of other people. In a world where you are never more than a phone call and a few hours from anyone you love. We spent this whole video cataloging what Mars lacks. And every single thing it lacks is something Earth simply hands us every day as a gift we forgot we were even receiving. There's a famous photograph taken long ago by a spacecraft far out in the solar system that looked back toward home and captured the Earth as a single point of light. Not a world of oceans and forests and cities, just a tiny pale blue dot, smaller than a single pixel, suspended in a beam of scattered sunlight in the immense black. And the thought that has stayed with people ever since is this: everything that has ever happened to every human being who has ever lived, every birth, every love, every triumph and heartbreak and ordinary afternoon, all of it took place on that one tiny dot. That is our home. That is the only home our species has ever had, or for the foreseeable future, ever will. And when you really understand Mars, when you grasp how hostile it is, how hard it would be, how much it would take just to keep a handful of people barely alive there, you come to see something that all the inspiring trailers leave out. Earth is far easier to save than Mars is to colonize. The same energy, the same genius, the same vast resources we'd pour into making a dead world barely survivable could instead make our living world thrive. We could clean its air, heal its oceans, steady its climate, protect its astonishing web of life, and safeguard the one place in the entire known universe that welcomes us without a fight. So maybe that's the real lesson of the red dot in the night sky. Not that we should never go. We probably will, and there's something magnificent in the trying, but that the dream of Mars, in the end, should make us fall back in love with Earth. It should make us look around at the impossible, improbable, breathtaking gift of this planet and resolve to take care of it. Because in all the cold and silent vastness of space, across everything we've learned tonight, one truth shines clearer than any other. There is nowhere else like home, not anywhere we can reach, not anywhere we've found. There is only this, one pale blue dot, alive against the dark, carrying every story we've ever known, and it's worth protecting with everything we have. Thank you for taking this long journey with me, all the way to Mars and back. If it gave you a new way of seeing that little red light in the sky, or a new appreciation for the ground beneath your feet, then it was worth every minute. The challenges are real. The dream is hard. But understanding the truth of it clearly and honestly is how we make wise choices about where we go from here. Wherever that turns out to be, may we go with our eyes open, and may we never forget how rare and how precious the world we already have truly is.